Hello, my name is Lino Tadros from Falafel Software, and this video is part one of a two-series videos regarding custom workflows in Sitefinity. The first one, in this video, we will talk about custom workflows from file standards, regarding how we're going to include XAMLX files from Windows Workflow 4.0 directly into the project itself. The second part, in part 2 video, we will discuss how to create class libraries, other assemblies, and reference these assemblies where it will have the activities and so on. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio here. I just started a few minutes ago a brand new project called Sitefinity or Falafel SF. It's a completely empty Sitefinity web application. And let me go ahead and run it here really quickly. There we go. This is the only page on this site. It's just some lorem ipsum, just so we can have at least one page available. But there are nothing else in this entire website. It's using the regular SQL Server Express on this website as well. All right, so where do we start? First of all, you would probably wonder where are all the workflows that come automatically with Sitefinity itself. And you will not be able to find any files available inside of your project, or even if you go to the hard drive where the Sitefinity project itself has been installed. That is my Sitefinity 4.4 projects. That is the Falafel SF website that I just created, and you will not find anything even remotely close to something for XAMLX files or anything to do with Windows Workflow 4. Why is that? The reason for that, folks, is that all the stuff is embedded inside of the assemblies of Sitefinity itself. So if you open the references, or you even go to the bin directory here on your hard drive, there are several assemblies in here for Telerik, especially Telerik.Sitefinity, that contains all the logic between all the workflows. So these are all resources inside of the Telerik assemblies in your bin directory. That's why you don't have access to that. So the question now is, how are we going to change that? Well, the way to change that, like everything else in Sitefinity, whether it's widgets or modules, if you'd like to make changes to controls and definitely in workflows, you will need to have the SDK. So you need to go to your account on the Sitefinity.com website and download the Sitefinity SDK. It's about 800 meg, pretty close to a gig, and it has a lot of jewels in there. It's very, very valuable. You will learn so much by downloading the SDK. So I installed my SDK in here inside of my Sitefinity 4.4 directory, and I'll go to the SDK in here. There will be tons of stuff. The one I'm interested in is under the content folder, and there will be another directory here called resources. Under the resources, there will be 4 different zip files. One of them is the workflow zip file. It contains all different workflows that come automatically embedded into the Sitefinity references. Okay, I opened up the zip file and I extracted it, and I ended up with this default workflows directory. Let's open it up. You will notice there is 4 different XAMLX files in here. These are the Windows Workflow 4 files that Visual Studio will definitely understand. And you can actually change some of the logic in the page approval system, or general approval workflows, or the libraries regarding images and videos and so on. The one I'm going to do for this video in here will be about any content approval workflow. That means if you want to make changes to news items, blog items, list items, all these things you can change the logic of the flow inside of workflow itself. So let's go ahead and copy this file from here. We'll say copy. And now I'm going to go to my project for Sitefinity, and let's go ahead and create a brand new folder in here. We'll say new folder. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine My Workflows, like this. Alrighty. And inside of the My Workflows, I'm going to go ahead and paste this file I just got from the SDK. We'll say paste this, and there we go. One of the things I definitely recommend for you to do, whether you're going to use it from inside of a file system or from an assembly, to always remember immediately when you bring in a XAMLX file for Sitefinity is to click on it and change the build action on it from content to embed resource. This is an important piece, because if you don't do that, it will waste some time debugging for you, because it's difficult to find out what went wrong. So always remember to embed the resource of your XAMLX files if they're going to be part of the project, or if they're going to be, of course, coming from a different DLL anyway. Alrighty. So what is this any content approval workflow right now? That is the main workflow for Sitefinity. So if I open it up by double clicking it, the Visual Studio will load the entire Workflow Foundation designer right inside of the IDE, and you will be able to see exactly what the architects and developers of Sitefinity have developed for you. And there it is. The entire content approval workflow service is in here. You will notice the content approval part in the middle in here has the down arrows. That means I can actually click on it and see the rest of it. That's the entire content approval available in here. And notice in Sitefinity we have multiple approval systems. There is one for one level approval workflow, one for two level approval workflow, but there is also the default workflow. A lot of people think of workflow as something that has to do with approving and rejecting, but actually it's not just about status. The truth about workflow, it is a lot more than that. You can actually intercept anything in the system and choose a completely different route, or insert your own activity that you developed yourself, for instance. So even if I'm not going to turn on any workflow, I can still affect the system by double clicking the default workflow in here. And you'll notice this is the entire workflow that Sitefinity has designed for you already. You can see things when you discard the draft, or you stop scheduling, or deleting a file, or deleting a content item in the system, publish or unpublish. You can actually insert your own. Okay, so this is great because this actually will allow you to understand a lot more about what's going on from the moment you click on, for instance, the button that says publish. What exactly happens? What does Sitefinity do to get you from point A to point B? So my interest in here, after I publish an item, so if you take a look in here, it says published. This route in here, I would like to change this route. Before we actually check the clearance, assign the clearance expiration date, or do anything else, I would like to do something else in here, just for you to see how we can create something like that. All right. In that case, you'll have to create your own activity first. Okay. Notice on the side here in the toolbox, there is a lot of different widgets and controls for workflow, Windows Workflow Foundation 4.0. But in my case in here, I'm going to go to my workflows. I'm going to actually right click on that, and we'll say I would like to add a brand new item. And I'm going to create my own code activity. That's the class you'll have to inherit from to create your own activity. Okay. And I'm going to actually create something. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to use the same code that comes from the great new documentation. Sitefinity just released new documentation, has some great custom workflow documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and create this one, and we'll call this one set author activity. So what the example that comes from Sitefinity, for instance, in the SDK says, let's say, for instance, you create a news item or a blog item, and you forget to put an author. You can actually put some code in your own activity that this will not be acceptable anymore, and it will not ask for approval or rejection or anything like that. If you insert a new news item or a blog item, for instance, and you forget to put an author, the system will find out who you are that is logged into the backend, will get your first name and last name, and will make you the author on that item automatically. So let's go ahead and see how they did that. I'm going to call it set author activity like that, and we'll say add. Notice that will add an activity here under my workflows. And notice it inherits from code activity. That's very important. And the most important thing is that code activity is an abstract class. So that means you have to implement the execute method. And that's, of course, the secret behind doing any activities in Windows Workflow Foundation 4.0. They also give you an example in here in case you need to pass any in parameters, for instance. So this is an automatic property called text that has a getter and setter. So you can implement this however you'd like to create your own activity in here. I'm going to copy and paste the code that I got actually from the SDK itself to do this example. So let's go ahead and delete this code in here, and we'll paste it right there. And there's a missing bracket at the end. There you go. So if you take a look at the code in here, it's trying to use the Fluent API to find out if you have a property called author on your own work item, which is in our case here is the news item that we'll be looking for. And also you'll notice some code here for the Sitefinity principal and the user manager, just to find out who is logged in, and then from there we can pass that ID and get the username and password, first name and last name of the author, and insert it automatically on the Fluent API for the author in the news item. So you can take a look at this code. There's some red in here because I'm missing some using statements. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click on these guys. Makes it easy to add all the using statements in here. There you go. all these using statements. There you go. Makes it easy to add all the stuff. There you go too. So, and we're done. Notice all these using statements have been added automatically for me. And now I've got myself a brand new activity that got created inside of my Sitefinity project. All right, great. Now let's go ahead and compile this entire project again. We'll say build solution. Actually succeeded. And now let's go back to any content approval workflow.xamlx and see how we can deal with that. By opening the XAMLX file, which is the actual workflow for the entire approval system for the content, there it is. I'm going to open up the content approval again. We'll go to the default workflow. And I would like to add something in here based on my own set author activity. The nice thing about Visual Studio, of course, it knows that this is inheriting from code activity, so it added the set author activity, as you can see on the left side in here, in the toolbox itself, because it's part of the same project. That sounds great. Let's go ahead and drag this set author activity in here and put it right there. Notice it's not hooked up to anything, it's just floating in the air by itself in here. And I'm going to change that arrow in here that goes from published automatically to the clear expiration date assignment. I'm going to drag it and tell it that it has to go through that first. Okay? And now from here, I'm going to drag it into the rest of the flow so I don't have to break the flow. So the only thing I've done is insert my own activity that the system has to be passing by it when I publish any item in the system at this point. That sounds good. This is how easy it is to deal with workflows and making it changes. This could be send an email that you can write in C# or VB, for instance, to send an email to somebody when something happens without using any approval or any of that stuff inside of the system. Alrighty? So let's go ahead and save this, and I'm going to go ahead and compile it one last time. And now we're going to go ahead and run this inside of the browser and see. This is only part of the solution. Now we have to tell really Sitefinity that we are using a brand new workflow, okay? Because right now it's not taking effect because it's not being used in the system. All right, we'll go ahead and click on run. That will run the whole system again in my main browser here, which is Chrome. And there is my main page. We're going to go ahead and log into the back end for Sitefinity. And once we log in, I need to go to the administration and settings of this website to be able to tell it that I would like to use a different workflow from that point on. We'll say administration, settings. And here we go to advanced. And all the way at the bottom, once this loads, at the bottom in here, we'll see there is something called workflow. And you'll notice also there is workflows in here. And these are the workflows that come with the system automatically. They have one for pages, one for blog posts, one for list items, news items, event, and libraries like videos and images and documents. There is all these different specific workflows set up. What I'm going to choose, for instance, let's see the news model.news item in here. This is very important. Bear with me here, folks, because this is the number one reason why people get confused about custom workflows in Sitefinity. Notice here that the type that I'm going after is anything that has to do with Telerik Sitefinity news.model.news item. So this will affect only the news item type. But if you take a look at the service URL, the service URL is pointing to root, which is / default workflow / and the name of our XAMLX file. If you take a look in Visual Studio, there is nothing in here called default workflows. Where is that coming from? And that's definitely the important part, is to understand this part in here. Folks, this is not real. There is no directory called default workflows. So the service URL requires a path inside of the system itself. That's why we end up getting this functionality in Sitefinity called virtual path settings. So I cannot come in here, for instance, to service URL and pass a type like this. It has to be a path. So you go to virtual path settings in here, and you'll notice that the system has a lot of different virtual passes for images, for services like REST services and so on that are embedded inside of the DLLs and the assemblies of Sitefinity itself. One of them, as you can see in here, is called the default workflows, any content approval workflow. If you click on it in here, you will notice that the virtual path has the word default workflows. This is not real. This is fabricated on the fly in here. But the important part is the resource location. This is the part where the system will find the resource for the XAMLX file. And obviously it's inside of the telerik.sitefinity assembly with the namespace, workflow, workflows, any content approval workflow. So every time the system will see this pass, we'll end up getting it from the resource inside of the assembly. So don't get confused about this piece in here. I'm not going to need to use it in my sample because I have it as a real file in here. But in the part 2, when we will do this based on a different assembly, we will have to do this trick to tell the system that whenever it sees this kind of virtual pass, to go get it from a resource inside of my own assembly later on. Does that make sense? All right, let's go ahead and open up the workflows again. In here, I'll go down, open up workflows, and there is my news item. And here I'm going to change this as a real service URL pass. So I'm going to delete this. We'll say my workflows. Okay, that's exactly the same pass now that I have physically on the file system. All right, we'll say save changes, and now let's go ahead and try one of my content. We'll say we'll create a new news items in here, and I'm hoping from that point on that the system will use my XAMLX file, not the one embedded inside of the assemblies of Sitefinity itself. All right, we'll create a brand new item in here for the news. And if we go to the title, and here we'll say my first news item, for instance. It could be a blah blah blah, it's no big deal. I just want to remind everybody that when I publish this, the additional info in here have no author name. Okay, I'm logged in as admin, and the admin right now is actually Lino Tadros, is my name. I'm going to say publish this. Now we are pretty much sure that after the publication is happening, my set author activity is firing inside of the default workflow. And if this worked correctly, I should be able to reopen this my first news item, and I should see that the author is Lino Tadros, as you can see in here. That actually took place automatically for me based on my workflow. And there it is, Lino Tadros. The first name and last name based on the user manager was executed in the code, and all the stuff worked correctly. Hopefully that was useful to you to understand how to deal with file-based workflows and how to bring in from the SDK any workflow and modify it however you'd like. And in the next part 2, we'll deal with outside class libraries and assemblies, how to include them as well. Thank you.